tonight with June 17, 1972. The day 5 bungling burglars broke into the offices of the Democratic National Committee, located in the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. 2 years later, President Nixon resigned. The 50th anniversary of Watergate comes as public hearings are underway by the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. 2 major political scandals, nearly half a century apart, 2 presidents driven by a thirst for power. Unlike Trump, Nixon pulled his scandal despite being on a comfortable path to re-election, and his efforts to meddle were more secretive than the very public, brazen attempts by Trump, who relied on the cameras and the internet to provoke his Capitol siege. Let's not forget that Trump pressured Vice President Pence privately, too, bullied him even. And while Nixon was a bully, too, just behind the scenes, he never set up his vice president for execution. Trump, however, did exactly that, relentlessly badgering Pence to break the law, incorrectly claiming that the vice president had the power to unilaterally overrule the votes of 80 million people and reverse the results of the election, saying if he didn't, he was a coward, or the colloquial word for a kitty. It was as Trumpian as it gets, filled with taunts, harassment, and lies.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. Because you're sworn to uphold our Constitution.
At 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, Trump condemned Pence in a tweet, just as the crowds outside and inside the Capitol surged. This is what Sarah Matthews, a former Trump press aide, said in an interview with panel investigators about that crucial moment.
It was clear that it was escalating and escalating quickly. So then when that tweet, the Mike Pence tweet, was sent out, I remember us saying that that was the last thing that needed to be tweeted at that moment. The situation was already bad. And so it felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
On Thursday, the January 6th committee revealed in vivid, terrifying detail just when the target was seared onto the vice president's back.
I'm hearing reports that Pence caved. I'm telling you, if Pence caved, we're going to drag motherfuckers through the streets. You politicians are going to get drugged through the streets.
Think about a traitor, and he deserves to burn with the rest of them.
We just heard that Mike Pence is not going to reject any fraudulent elector votes. That's right. You heard it here first. Mike Pence has betrayed the United States of America.
Now, remember, this attack came with bloodshed, what a Capitol officer called carnage. They erected a gallows outside the building, fit for a lynching. And the third hearing revealed that the Proud Boys would indeed have killed the vice president if given the chance, forcing Pence's security detail to rush him from the Senate chamber to a nearby room, then down a flight of stairs to an underground loading dock, where he waited for nearly 5 hours. It is hard to imagine a bigger scandal than the one that forced an American vice president to literally hide in a basement as a mob just dozens of feet away called for his head. But the scandals we remember, that history remembers, are the ones, like Watergate, that result in meaningful consequences. Today, new details emerged from the January 6th committee. It is now cooperating with the Department of Justice to share transcripts of their interviews, 2 days after the DOJ sent the committee a letter saying it was critical that the committee provide transcripts of all witness interviews. Consequences may be coming. Joining me now is Michael Steele, MSNBC political analyst and former RNC chair, and Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian and host of Fireside History on Peacock. We like to think of Michael Beschloss as our resident historian as well. So, Michael, I'm going to let you go at it. I'm going to let you go at it because these are the parallels, right? Both presidents wanted to remain president, wanted to cling to power. They had 2 very different methods. But, I personally feel that setting up your vice president for execution takes it a notch higher than Watergate, but I'm going to leave it to you. You're the historian.
No, I think it does take it a notch higher than Watergate. And, I grew up always thinking that Watergate was a terrible scandal and maybe the worst in American political history. And until Donald Trump, it probably was. But Richard Nixon never dreamt of doing things like disrupting the peaceful transfer of power, which, as both of you well know, is the foundation stone of American democracy. And also, just as you're saying, he didn't like Spiro Agnew. I'm not going to call Spiro Agnew Michael Steele's fellow Republican in Maryland. Michael has evolved quite a lot since he was in Maryland politics in those days. He was, I should say, long after Spiro Agnew. But the point is that Nixon didn't like him. Nixon wanted to get rid of him, but never wanted to go to this extent. And the point is that Richard Nixon, as bad as he was, if we're talking about peaceful transfer of power, look at what he did in 1960. He lost to John Kennedy. That election, as you both know, was decided by two states, Texas and Illinois. Texas, 45,000 votes, 9,000 votes in Illinois. Nixon was convinced till the end of his life that those two states were stolen from him. Yet, when it came to certifying the votes, Vice President Nixon, on the 6th of January, 1961, went into the House chamber and graciously said, John Kennedy has been elected President of the United States. And one of the great features of democracy, he said, is that when there is a winner and a loser, the loser admits it, and the loser says to the country, let's unite.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, you know, Michael Steele, in one way, you know, the difference between Nixon and Trump is that Nixon was a patriot. You know, you can say whatever else you want about him, but he had the dignity to resign, right? In the end, he loved his country more than he loved himself. That is not true of Trump. But, I want to talk to you just a little bit about kind of the trajectory, because I do feel like a lot of Republican Party politics was shaped, you know, in the post-Nixon era by a resentment toward Nixon being forced out. You know, I to this day will swear that, you know, the impeachment of Bill Clinton was in part a chance to sort of balance the checkbook. There was determination to impeach Bill Clinton. No matter what, you're going to look for something because they wanted to balance the checkbooks. You had people like Roger Stone that came out of the Nixon era that thought you could just get a better version of Nixon. And he explicitly said, there's a documentary called Get Me Roger Stone, where he says Trump would be the perfect new Nixon. And I feel like Nixon really shaped the kind of resentment politics, not to mention the racial politics of the Republican Party. What do you think?
No, I think that's a very accurate historical point. In fact, not just Nixon being balanced by what we see going on, what we saw going on with Clinton, but also when you go back and you look at the Bork nomination, and Merrick Garland is payback for Bork, and all the efforts beneath the surface, the other efforts that we've seen play out in stalling and pushing back against Democrats on Supreme Court nominations. So there is, you know, we're nothing if not petty. I mean, I think that that's clear historically at this point. We're the elephant symbol for a reason, because we do remember the slights and the unfortunate knocks upside the head. But the difference, though, I think it's important to point out, as Michael did, the difference between these two men. Nixon had a connection to the country. Yeah. Say what you want about, how he performed in office. He had a connection to the country, and he knew where the bright lines were. Trump didn't give a damn about the connection to the country, had no clue where the lines were, in fact, didn't want to know where the lines were, because that was just an unnecessary burden he'd have to carry around to know that, okay, I got to pretend like, I really care here. So there's a big difference. And what's stark about that, in my view, is how much the party just acquiesced to obliterating the lines, no longer caring about the country, which is what the stand was for me personally in 2020. The country matters more than the party. And I think a lot of people see that now starkly, as these hearings on the Hill have shown.